Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Alfalfa Podcast. We are four radically moderate internet entrepreneurs serving up alpha in investing, politics, and life. We are Nick Urbani, Steven Cesario, Eric Johansson coming in from Jackson Hole, and I'm yours truly, Armand Asadi. Join us as we swim in the messy gray ocean of I don't quite know the answer, because oftentimes the truth is somewhere in the middle. All links at alfalfapod.com. Make sure to hit subscribe, of course. If you're feeling super generous, leave us a review, especially the funny ones. We love those, and maybe we'll read it out on the show. And last but not least, check out our sponsor today, Collective Shift, for crypto insights and analysis, and use our special little code, Alfalfa, for a no-risk free trial. Cheers, boys.
Cheers, salud.
I am ready. I have already switched from the mezcal to the wine.
Continuing from the Bankless podcast.
What are you drinking, Eric, by the way? What do you got?
Ooh, good question.
What do you got?
I have agave nectar.
Oh, nice.
The old nectar of the gods.
Sure.
Sorry, Nick. I just interrupted you.
We have some mezcal going to kind of continue where we came from the Bankless podcast. So all those joining in, freshly new, welcome, Bankless Nation. We are definitely one of you, and we hope to share some different views today. But yeah, we're continuing the mezcal today.
Yes. So agenda for today: Alfalfa Round, Fire Round, where we go through, we talk about our trades, our moves, what we did this week, and for our three segments, we've got investing. We're going macro. We're talking about was this the bottom this week? Very curious to hear your guys' perspective. Policy. We're going guns, gun control. Very hot, very controversial. This will be a big one. And last but not least, for the life segment, we're talking porn. Are you guys ready for that?
Oh, yeah.
Don't hold back now.
10 years old, I've been ready for that.
Wow, late bloomer, huh? You didn't have the black box by 8 years old, 9 years old?
Oh, yeah. Channel 00 when it was all gray and fuzzy, but you could kind of
It's on nipple.
I had a black box. Dude, I would wake up at like 2 a.m. in the middle of the night. It was a whole... We'll talk about that. We'll save it for you. We'll talk about that. Welcome Bankless Nation. So we obviously had that incredible episode on Bankless. Thank you again to our amazing friend David Hoffman.
That was so much fun.
Dude,
I had so much fun.
So good.
We're having a blast in the Discord with all the new Bankless members coming over. We're having an awesome time.
What a cool crew in the Discord. Like, we're having so much fun chatting with you guys, and you guys are definitely a whole lot of fun bringing the minimalistic disco vibes inside the Discord. So yeah, happy to have all the new friends and faces on Twitter, on Discord, and yeah, let's continue it. Let's have some fun.
I've actually had multiple people like approach me and be like, "Hey, why were you shitting on XL1?" And I was like, I'm sorry, I had a few, but like, don't take me too. I think
the answer is that's
literally
just me.
You know,
I
get out there a little bit.
He's a nihilist.
Don't take it personally. It wasn't one of my more nuanced moments.
I have to say, I think that's something we bring. Like, that's something you bring in particular. You're honest.
Chaos.
You talk objectively. It's chaotic. It's
Thank you.
Pretty nihilistic.
Chaotic.
Let's dive into the Alfalfa Round. So, Nick, kick us off.
Yeah, let's see what we did last week. I mostly sat tight, kind of watching the markets. I did close out some some puts on the Qs, on the QQQ, and the NASDAQ. I think around the time we did the podcast.
Why did you close them? You think we're going higher?
Well, I mean, it felt at the time like we were about to go higher. I mean, we had, several weekly candles in a row consecutively. And, I definitely missed some dumps on those puts. So I knew I was like going into treacherous territory there. So anyway, I had a small win. I closed them out. I was in and out of some shorts on Sol throughout the week. Oh man, I wish I would have brought my laptop to the bar just to save a little bit of extra cash, but I missed out. In any case, did a little bit of that. I sold a portion of my Optimism airdrop. Love the project, but I kind of have a no altcoin policy during this market, so trying to stick to it. So anyway, that was the moves for the week, and we'll see what coming up this week, but those puts are looking very tempting again. We'll see.
Yeah, I think last week was one of my worst trading weeks of all time.
Like, you lost a bunch of money? Or
no,
tell us,
I
Steven.
just made, I remember you were like, so I'm putting on a bunch of puts, and I was like, really? You're putting on puts here? at the bottom where all the support is, and then I immediately went home and shorted a bunch of altcoins.
I didn't. I was like asking the question, what do you think? And I didn't do it. So did you?
I literally did the opposite thing I told you to do. I don't know. I make bad decisions sometimes, and so then it was a rough weekend because Bitcoin immediately just ripped, and I was like, oh my god, I'm a moron. I shorted support. I'm an idiot. But I decided to just sit on my hands. Sometimes you just got to sit on your hands and just be like, nothing's gonna happen probably in the next 24 hours. Calm down, think about it. So I calmed down. I took a step back, and then Bitcoin and the whole market took a complete shit again today. So I felt a lot better, and now all my shorts are actually somehow in the green, and I think I am actually like net short overall now. I'd been just was the hedger before. I was just hedging.
How do you reconcile that with your soul to be net short, but like reconcile that with your soul to be okay?
Well, I'm
in the
not
world?
technically short ETH. I'm just short like a basket of like grade A shitcoins. You know, just all of the dumbest things I think that exist where the funding rate's not
I'm
too
for
bad.
it. I'm for it. I just wonder if there's like this like id superego thing going on where there's like a clash within your
We may
identity.
need to explore this.
Oh no, I don't.
Might be a recurring thing.
I don't care about all cryptos or anything. You know, I'm trying to make money. I care a little bit, but like I don't care about Harmony One. Sorry, I did it again. Oh,
No, I like it.
more hate.
It's fine. It's fine. Be you, Steven.
Sorry, Harmony One fans.
Cool. I love it. Eric,
Well, we
CFA world.
on our Bankless episode, we said that like you can be bullish the industry, but you don't have to just like hold it forever. So I think that's important to say that like we do like ETH and everything long term, but like in the short term, we don't have to just hold that long. And I've been looking on the TradFi side. I've been looking to like get out on a pump on some of our like tech holdings. That seemed to happen like right into Friday, and then like it spilled over into the weekend of the coins. So I exited more of our positions and then took that opportunity to short some more alt L1s. And we got the airdrop on Optimism. Again, I am bullish on Optimism long term, but for right now, I do not want to be holding that. I think getting it at a cheaper price. I dumped my airdrop. I'm sorry, David Hoffman. We dumped it. We'll be back in. We're long-term bullish. So that's what I did.
I love it. And I guess to wrap the round, Optimism airdrop, claimed it. And my favorite part about all of that was the quiz, as I called it, the security filter. And I think that, yes.
I was gonna say I dig that.
What did they do? I didn't even claim.
So
mine.
they have
Oh,
like
that's why you were looking at me earlier. I was like,
what is this? It gave you a little
I thought you
like
were looking at me like,
gave you a little like quiz. I mean, for all the viewers,
I'm calling it a quiz.
At home too. It was like the quiz you get when you cancel your subscription. Like, hey, I noticed you're leaving. Do you
kind of, but the opposite version, like where you're opting in, and I need to make sure this is actually something you deserve and want, and that you understand what you're actually.
But they like don't give it to you if you answer the questions wrong?
I think it was actually David Hoffman one time. It was like airdrops are not free money; they're responsibility. So, are you going to take responsibility, and do you understand what you're taking responsibility for? That's basically the way I look at it.
You should go
Is
through
that
the quiz, Steven. You should go through this quiz.
Yeah.
We'll be like, didn't read it, dump.
And then they'll send me your airdrop. They're just going to distribute it to everybody else.
That would be. I did see that they put out a proposal in governance today to just like ban everybody from future airdrops who dump their airdrops, which is going to go over really well. Like, yay, governance.
So
well, I hope they're not doing that on the quiz, though.
I kept it, and we'll see. That's basically
all right. So
that's all I have to say. That's all I have to say about
all the future free money.
Cool. So we obviously ended with some pretty riveting, fun, tipsy discussion at the end of the last episode around the merge. Some back and forth between Steven and David. Nick, where do we take it from here? Can you set us up to kind of dive into the week of macro, and was this the bottom?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going to toss it to Steven for some like macro things that happened this week. But we were definitely kind of rumbling around the conversation. Is this the bottom? And what impact does the merge have on a potential bottom? Is the merge going to like exceed macro forces? Are we going to see the ETH BTC matrix, persist? And well, I think, Steven mentioned that chart looked like it wanted to take a dump, and surely a few hours later it certainly did. So that's one cue, but I think it would be good to kind of cover some macro highlights, and I think we'd all give our input on is this the bottom, and what we kind of look at the markets before we get into some policy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, last week was a little chaotic in macro. We had stocks bottom, but then crypto tanked in spite of the fact that stocks had their best week since 2020. And everybody was like, the decoupling, but in reverse. And there was panic. And ETH dumped 12% versus Bitcoin right after our episode, lost 20% versus the dollar that week, was one of the worst performing of all the altcoins. I think there was a lot of merge FUD and some other stuff going on. We can get into that. But then Bitcoin decided to just send it over the weekend, like a 10% candle in one day, and everybody's like, yeah, bull market's back on, baby. And then we woke up today and the whole market dumped all the way. So now we're back in that same kind of range where everybody's like, this is the bottom and we're accumulating, and other people are like, this is redistribution and we're going to dump more and it's going to be even worse. So nobody, I think, knows what's going on right now. There's a lot of people saying like, you're an idiot if you're not buying here. There's a lot of people saying we're going a lot lower. Curious what you guys think.
I mean, I posted on Twitter. I was curious. I think it was like Sunday night, and I was just like curious. We were obviously having this pump, and I'm like, what happened last bear market? Like, what was the biggest pumps? How many pumps did we have on all the way down? And it looks like Bitcoin had 6 bear market rallies that were over 10% in 2018, on its way from 20K to 3K. ETH had about 5 of those that were pumps greater than 10%, all the way from
10%.
All the way greater than 10%.
Weren't there like 40% ones?
Oh yeah, I'm getting to that, brother.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, and so all the way from $1,400 to $80, and at one point, both BTC and ETH had, I think, 4 or 5 weekly candles in the green, in which ETH doubled at one point in April 2018. And so my message was like, I don't know where it's going to go, but stay safe. Like, this could be a pump fake. And I think Michael Burry posted on Twitter quite a while back. Was it Michael Burry? No.
Michael Burry?
Who's, yeah.
The guy who shorted everything?
Yeah.
Cassandra, yeah.
Cassandra. Yeah. Anyway, he posted similar things about the NASDAQ and the S&P, like during those big recessionary periods, you see some pretty violent pumps. And so I think it's just good to be aware that that's happened and actually stare at the data and be like, wow, we had multiple of these on all the way down. So, DCAing helps here. But I don't know if you want to go all in. Had several people text me, are we diving all in back into ETH? And I said, I'm not personally. But anyway, I posted the data to Twitter, put it in the Discord. I found it useful to just compile together. Hopefully it's useful for people to stare at and kind of ponder.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. When you look back at some of these bear charts, right, they look ugly, but if you isolate them, you're like, holy crap. Like you said, like ETH doubled in this time period, and it still just went to complete hell, right? And then you look at everybody on Twitter. Last week was that, you see the meme with the guy who's like, oh, and it's like arrow up like 1%.
1%. I think that was in regards to the DeFi tokens for sure.
Just completely losing their shit. I mean, what scares me is that I was around in 2018 and everybody wasn't talking about like bear market rallies. Everybody was still like, this is a correction. And then eventually everybody was like, this is dead and it's never coming back. I don't remember people talking about bear market rallies. This is like the first one I've been in when everybody's like, bear market rallies, bear market rallies, bear market rallies. And I always get scared when like the meta is that everybody is focused on a bear market rally, and everybody who's tweeting or saying anything is like, yeah, so we're going to get a bear market rally at Bitcoin up to like 33, 35, 37K. We're going to retest there, and then I'm going to dump it. I'm just going to dump all my altcoins on that bearish retest, and we're going to go down to 12K. And
yeah, you should also play the freaking lottery and like try to get on the prices right. Like, good luck with that fucking game.
But like, I remember last summer, like Bitcoin dumped, and then it was just like, fuck you. It just dumped to hell. It never came back. It just dumped, and it dumped more, and then everybody was like, holy crap, there is no rally. And then people were really scared last summer, like really scared it was actually going to zero. And that was without the crappy macro backdrop. And the last kind of bear, we didn't have the macro bull drop as well. So I think it's good to be aware that like the market can rally a ton, even if it's not the bottom, but also that it's definitely different this time in a particular way. Like history rhymes, but
Right.
it's not exactly the same.
Yeah, I think the question is like that's circling a lot of people's minds, especially in the macro market, is have we gone past peak inflation? And I mentioned the Discord. There are
Yeah,
some
you dropped this in the Discord.
Yeah, there's some
I like
things that you could be led to believe that we have certainly passed peak inflation, like lumber prices going down, used cars. We might certainly see a decrease in housing costs with mortgage rates going up about 5%, probably going to go up, above 5.5%. But I think, and Stephen, you pointed this out, kind of following my comment, was like energy and food is a whole nother story, which is what actually hits, I think, most families in the pocketbooks. And the question is, let's say we have reached even peak inflation. Like, is this going to be some quick drop down to 2%? I find that really hard to believe. I think it's going to be this long sloping thing back down to 2% if we can get there within a reasonable time period. And so does the Fed bring more pain, to get it down to that 2% and see where we go from there? I'm curious, like Eric, what are your thoughts on like
About what I'm afraid of, because I
Yeah.
think we're all like, we have a bunch of new listeners after the Bankless episode, right? And they probably look at us and they're like, holy shit, these guys are bearish. And like, we're not, like, we actually see the long-term bullish thesis and all this stuff, right? Like, it's very obvious. And I think we're just playing it in this narrow time frame because we see how much macro is driving everything right now. So if we're talking about macro, we're talking about basically the Fed and monetary policy. And, to Nick's point, it's like, they're responding to inflation, and what inflation level comes out, it remains to be seen. But like, one thing that I'm afraid of is that in 2018, the Fed pivoted monetary policy very quickly. They saw the credit market break. It was, I believe, it was the repo market, and then they completely pivoted, and then you saw like a V-shaped recovery in markets. I don't think that that's going to happen, but I am worried that we are like ultra bearish on an industry that we are incredibly long-term bullish on, and then we see like this massive pivot, and that's sort of what keeps me up at night right now, because we have positioned ourselves in like a way that is safe and is prepared for further drawdowns, but I don't know if we're prepared for like the freaking rip up.
Yeah, I mean, Eric, I'm glad you pointed that out, because like we are certainly long-term bullish, and the reason I'm being cautious because I'm fucking greedy. Like, I want ETH to buy more ETH lower, and it looks like from everything from macro market, and even if you play a little technical analysis, like we could certainly go lower. I'm looking for that opportunity to buy more. I think a lot of people are. Like, the whole game is like, are we at the bottom so we can acquire more? I am curious about like Stephen's take on the quantitative tightening part, because you mentioned on Twitter that happy QT day, this is the official start of the Fed doing quantitative tightening, and that's where I get a little confused.
Let me give my take on this bottom piece really quick, and then let's shift to quantitative tightening, and then go to AR-15s. The question of is this a bottom, to me, is already a fascinating question. Everybody invests for a different purpose and has a different goal. My long-term sort of, let's just call it the big picture goal here, is freedom. And in the short term, it's how do I sleep better at night? And so the question of like, is this a bottom, to me, fundamentally for a type of investor like me, is a flawed question. Because what it does is it forces you to behave stupidly. You start to make poor decisions. If I'm asking myself what is the bottom, the only reason I'm asking myself that is because I'm trading the asset in the first place. And people like me, or just speaking for myself, and I think a lot of people, I represent a lot of people, if you have high conviction, if you fundamentally believe in this asset, there really is no reason to sell in the first place, because what are you doing? You're trying to make arbitrary, well, they could be fundamentally life-changing gains. Like, somebody out there, 1 out of 100 people is going to do what you just said, Nick, and is going to strike gold, is going to win. They're going to time it perfectly. But the data doesn't show that. It shows that fundamentally people that trade lose against the market. Like, how many books do I have to fucking read to understand that I can't outsmart the market? Psychology of money, it doesn't matter what it's about, whether it's real estate or stocks or crypto. These are the lessons that I have learned the hard way over and over and over again. So, and I'm not saying I completely disagree with you guys. I'm not saying I disagree with people that behave this way, But I think it's a game, and you guys want to play a game. And I don't point this out often enough, so maybe it's a good opportunity to point it out. If you enjoy playing this game, if you like a little bit of gambling, if you like a little bit of fun and you're willing to bet like that because you want a little bit of an edge, by all means, go for it. You think you have some advantage. You've done the technical analysis. You've done the homework. You understand. I mean, you're someone like Steven. You understand what you're doing. By all means, go for it. But the average to even above average to many even sophisticated investors, why would they do such a thing for an asset that they have high conviction?
I mean, I'm with you on this. Like, in fact, I haven't sold any Bitcoin, any ETH, any of the things that I like believe long term. I've just gone through that period of seeing everything go down, get marked down. In Excel, you're a lot poorer, and that's not a fun thing to go through.
So you're hitting at the opposite problem as well. It's the can I watch? Can I go through and withstand the volatility? So the only other reason to ask yourself, is this a bottom, is not because I want to, it's to accumulate.
Right. It's accumulate, but also like I think I've tried to learn, and the journey has come along talking to you guys. I've learned a lot talking to you guys about like, what can I do to possibly, hedge this downfall that I see might be happening. And I don't want to sell because like I am not going to predict everything correctly, but like maybe with 1% of my portfolio, I can hedge in a leveraged fashion.
And it gives you something to do for the next 18 months as well.
Maybe, but like along the process, I do want to learn about this, and I'm probably going to make some big mistakes. Like in when you're playing with puts, when you're playing with shorts, especially leverage shorts, like there are certainly a possibility to like evaporate your money. So like I only advise playing with like I'm playing with 1%. And Steven is definitely taking the more active role because, well, that's his like, main time gig. And so I'm trying to play the long-term role, but just trying to learn a little bit. And I think Eric's, kind of like on this path as well. Like, well, you don't have to watch it go all the way down. You can try to hedge on the way up, and, we may make some mistakes along the way.
Absolutely. And look, the only other reason someone's asking, is this the bottom, is because am I buying?
Right.
Am I backing up the truck? And another way to, in the short term, sleep better at night, and in the long term, to have more freedom, which is personally my goal, sleep better at night, have more freedom, have more passive income, have a larger portfolio that I can live off, is to DCA. So like, is 1800 the bottom, or is 2100, or is 800? Who the fuck cares? I'm buying all the way through consistently. So I think for some listeners, that is probably going to feel better. And for others, like, we'll continue talking about the moves that we make, but I think it's important to hear that.
I think a better strategy for people
Armani,
who are
strategy
slightly
sucks. A better strategy.
Slightly more, who want to do a little more than just sort of blindly DCA, is that instead of thinking about where the bottom is, think about when the next top might be. Right? Because then you're sort of optimizing for, I'm going to hold for longer than a year, and then I'm going to sort of aggressively take profits when I'm in cap gains mode, right? Because you're going to gain like a pretty big edge. Like if you're like, okay, I want to go in and out a little bit, which I think is a good strategy if you want to go slightly more advanced, because these things go up and down so much that there's like actually a huge edge in just not hodling forever. Like if you have the ability to do that, obviously it's a bit of a bar, but if you have like a little bit to commit to it, I think thinking about where the next cycle top might be is probably a little more valuable than where the bottom is.
How do I tangibly use that? So let's say I think the market cycle next top is going to be in 2024. Like, how do I actually tangibly use that?
Well, if you think the next top isn't going to be till like 2024, then a good strategy might be to just start DCAing now.
Okay.
You want to like try to plan in getting most of your like. There are things you can use that are somewhat dubious to sort of have a vague idea of where stuff might be 6 months from now, 12 months from now. Like especially the more kind of like long time frame you go with stuff like a moving average, right? Like the running average of price. Like if you try to trade on like the 1 minute chart, right, you're just going to get wrecked. That's like the domain of like high frequency traders and scalpers, right? But if you're a long-term investor and you're looking at the price of Ethereum on like a 300-week moving average, right? You don't necessarily have this like high bar for like crazy like trader acumen to be like, this is kind of a cheap price. Or when it gets around here, it's probabilistically speaking going to be a good price to buy in, right? Yeah. And so you start kind of being like, okay, like for me, like around this level, like 17 or so is where I'm like, okay, I'm nibbling off some. Like I personally think it's going to break lower, but like I'm nibbling off there because I think it's getting to the point where I'm looking 3 months ahead, and I'm like, okay, like if it stays for this level for 3 months, and 3 months from now, this is going to be like a really attractive price. And then if I sell like a year and a half later, that's probably where we're going to be maybe going into some more parabolic action. And now I get to like just harvest cap gains, right? And it keeps your trades on this like I'm holding for a minimum of a year mindset, and it prevents you from going in and out or doing anything stupid.
Well, I'm giggling over here because I don't know if you guys remember on the Bankless episode we did, I mentioned the 200-week moving average, and you kind of shitted on it. Said it's a little meme, and like
I did.
You did,
I did.
and that was what I'm
You
saying.
weren't expecting
I did.
that, were you?
But like
it is
it's
a-
shrewd
look.
advice, right? It's like a safer play. You may not be
Price-
Pico bottom.
It's a good
Okay, so
go lower.
there's some context to this, right? The 200 moving average for ETH has never been anything. Like it just went through that shit like hot
Right.
knife
Agreed.
through butter. So
Agreed.
it doesn't mean a lot for ETH. It has meant a lot for Bitcoin. And I think it's like an okay thing to anchor yourself to. What I am scared of is people being like, it always bounces off the 200, so I'm going to go all in there, leverage. There's no reason that has to continue. But I do think that, like as a general example, looking at longer term stuff to be like, to roughly say like, okay, I should buy a little more every week when I'm near the 200 and a little less or nothing every week when I'm way up and above it, right? Because like, that's fine. But again, for most people, I don't, like for you, Armand, a non-professional, an aficionado of the space, I don't think you should look at any of this. Like you should do the Warren Buffett thing, right? You should just sort of buy the index and go back to
Don't
work,
buy the rat poison.
earn more money. Well, no, not that analogy.
That part of Warren Buffett, or which?
No,
part?
he has a good statement
I
about.
mean, he's a billionaire. One of the, and
He has
richest
a
man
good
of-
statement about trading the S&P in stocks, and he's just like, you should just do another job, make more money, and use it to buy the index because you're going to be spending this time to beat the market, and you probably won't, and you should have just bought the index and done all that anyway.
Luckily, Armand, you're good at that.
We're all gonna be pretty happy buying at today's 1800 in 24 months plus. Like this is a good level,
100%.
Probably.
regardless of what we're talking about.
Hopefully.
Still a good level.
And I mean, what a freaking blessing! We had a little macro dump before the merge. Like it is, it's almost time to get greedy. I feel like
yes.
we're not there
The
yet.
merge.
Yeah, we don't have to
Praise
get into
be.
that. We're not going to get
Quantitative
into
easing or move on?
that. Quantitative tightening.
Oh,
but like, do
QT.
you want to?
tightening? yes.
Let's
Jesus,
talk guns. Let's
Christ.
talk guns.
Yeah, let's-
I wanna-
let's-
I wanna
Oh, you
move
want to
on.
get frisky?
All right.
All right.
It's-
Quantitative tightening. Google it.
Okay.
Fucking
the
Google it.
Listen to the podcast. Google it. We're here to tell you what to Google.
Hit me up in the Discord.
Yeah. Look, Eric, maybe you can not necessarily tee it up, but just begin with any general sentiment.
Wait, can we talk about our dinner last week after the podcast where
Oh,
we
wow, we're
recorded,
gonna
we were having a great time.
air some dirty laundry.
And then no, I'm upset. Eric called me a lot of bad names at dinner.
What
It's
do
an
you call
important preface.
He
'Cause
called me
people in the
he called me
Discord asked
he called
what
me the
R word.
He called me the R word.
Yeah, what's the R
a
word?
lot of times.
What's the R word?
I don't want to say it. Some people get mad at me if I say it. She might be listening.
Called him really smart.
Yes, yes. Some of the Discord was like, God, what was their guess? Did you see that? Oh, fuck.
Oh, what the R word was?
Yeah. It was
Oh
really
man!
good.
And in classic David fashion, he immediately starts moderating the discussion. So we're
Yes.
sitting around a table over a steak dinner. Armand and I are having like a little sidebar about a business we're working on, and these guys are absolutely just yelling at the top of their lungs.
I wasn't yelling. I was being yelled at.
No. Nearby
I was civilized.
tables.
I'm with
were-
Steven on this one. He was being yelled at.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of the yelling. I was yelling. I was
To Eric's credit, the next day he was like, "Yo, my bad."
One of the
Yelled
things
at you a
about
little
Steven
bit.
is he dishes it, right? Steven dishes it. Basically disagrees with everything most of us say.
I'm a good punching bag.
And yet takes it quite well, good sir.
You stay
Yeah.
pretty rational,
You
pretty
stay
calm in the
calm.
heat of the argument. I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, you stay calm.
But yeah, like David had to moderate a little bit of
Yeah. Okay, so what were we talking about? We were talking about guns. We were talking about the shooting. It was like the day after. Actually, maybe this was.
Uvalde shooting, right? That was the one.
Yeah, we have to even call it which one now
Yeah,
at this
it's
point. That's
getting a little out of
that
hand.
basically tells us what we need to know. But look, yeah, let's give it to Eric here. Like just some general sentiment here of like how you felt that day, maybe how you feel now, and then we'll kind of open a discussion.
Yeah, so I think this is my third conversation now since that moment where I was yelling at Steven across the table. So I hopefully can maintain race. Sorry, Steven, again. Sorry, everybody. I think like where I'm at, I want to talk about how I feel about it, and then I want to talk about like why I feel about it, how I frame that decision making, and then I'll like pass it over to you guys. But like how I feel about it is like I don't own any guns, but I do believe in the right to own them. And the reason why I believe in the right to own them is maybe different than a lot of other people's. Like some people are into hunting or protecting themselves. Like what I'm into is protecting against this like really rare sort of like 4 standard deviation case where the government starts to impose themselves too hard on its own citizens to a point where it's like, oh my God, they're actually like getting violent against us, and now we have some recourse. Like and I think Armand, we were talking about this a little bit at the table, like maybe in a moment of sanctity for me, but like you mentioned that like this has happened more times than we really give it credit. Like in a lot of different countries, in a lot of different civilizations, like the government, its own government has come down on its own people. And like the fact that we have guns is very important. Now the way that I want to frame, so that's how I feel. The way I want to frame that decision making is that like I'm not blind. I am empathetic to the fact that like we are paying a cost every day to maintain this security against this like 4 standard deviation rare event, blacktail, like black swan, like long tail event. Like there is a cost day to day. Like even just today, we saw another event, like in Oklahoma hospital. There was 5 people murdered in a shooting. I didn't even really get too deep into it, but like every day there are events.
Yeah.
And these are the costs. And I don't want to like throw them as statistics because they're actual human lives. And like,
Yeah.
I recognize that we are paying actual cost in terms of lives for a perceived potential threat that is very low probability here in the United States, particularly because like you would say like, oh, well, other countries, you know, that's them. But like here in the United States, it wouldn't happen here. But it's like, maybe it wouldn't happen here because we have freaking guns. And that's like where I want to frame it is like, so you have this threat existential that like is not yet construed, but it is a potential threat, and you want to protect against that. And in the immediate term, you're paying an actual cost. So like where I'm at is like, how do we mitigate the actual cost? And I think those comes out in like multiple themes, right? Like mitigating the actual cost comes out in themes. And one theme is like, well, what about like mental health? And then another theme is like, well, what about restricting access? And another theme is like, well, what about, what about like changing the type of weapon? And these are like different parties talk about these 3 different themes on mitigating the actual cost. And I think that's like a real conversation to have, and I don't know what the right answer is on how to mitigate, but I do think that mitigating the actual cost while still maintaining the security against this real potential threat is probably what we should be talking about.
I have a question. What would you say that I said that triggered you so much? Because I don't even remember what I said.
Playing this perfect.
Because everything you said sounds kind of reasonable. I don't like disagree with any.
Yeah, so I don't want to trigger Stephen or I,
level.
And this is actually a better sidebar.
No, I'm not triggered. I'm not triggered.
I will get triggered, but,
As all the triggered say.
so I brought this up at the dinner table, and you guys all disagreed with me. But Stephen has a knack of taking the conversation away from its intended into a technicality. And what happened in our conversation is that in our technicality, I said that AR-15s are more lethal than pistols, and Steven came at me with a stat that says pistols kill more people than AR-15s, so therefore more lethal. But what I was trying to say is that like,
You know what's fascinating about that? Is that you're both
AR-15 is higher, and I don't really want to get into that.
right.
But that's where we got
I feel
lost.
like it's kind of worth getting into. Everyone wants to
No, we
ban-
don't. Before we get into that,
okay,
first of all,
okay.
what's fascinating about just that right there is that they're both right. And so let's just zoom out for 1
You
second.
don't think one of us is more right than the other?
Maybe. And we can debate that and fight in the messy gray of the middle. And I think that's like what I'm trying to point out. This topic reminds me so much of abortion. One of the most complex topics in existence. I think that fundamentally, like, guns are also a topic that relates to life, right? People are dying. Abortion, fetuses, babies are dying. Like, it's a similar topic. And obviously that brings out an incredible amount of emotion and an incredible amount of identity and partisan politics, okay? So that's what's fascinating about this. Now, look, I just want to kind of like more grandiose, big picture set a couple things. And of course, yes, you can follow up, Nick. Look, I'm not an expert on any of this. I have certain like my own ideas and sentiments. And I think that like Stephen and Nick have some very interesting data through the years that they've come across that they'll share. And even things today I know you were looking at, Stephen, for example, that you'll share. But here's something that's very important about this topic, just like the abortion topic. The number of layers that exist here and how you begin to piece these together is incredibly difficult. Let's just look at a couple of these layers. One, you have a country, the United States of America, where most of this is happening, where mass murders are happening, where people are being killed by gunfire, whether it's gang related or not. Sometimes I'm like, Steven's doing the technicality thing, by the way.
Steven and I are making faces at Armand as he's going through
Am I
this.
making a face? I feel like I'm not making a face. It's like completely involuntary.
I can't even get. So you have this country that was founded by people that were persecuted, and you've seen this all around the world, that genocide and ethnic cleansing and religious beliefs get in the way of societies, even societies that are extremely homogenous, for example. Like you get the same effects. And so people often argue and they say like, well, why does a country like Sweden or Finland not need guns, but you guys do? So we have this aspect, just one layer here that we're driving, where you have this country that was founded because of persecution, because of beliefs that they had that were different from the state, from the country that they lived in, and they had to leave. They had to go create a new society. And one of the first beliefs and one of the first principles that they laid into their documents was the right to bear arms. And the reason for that was because that they believed that the moment that the government stopped fearing its people, there was enough power that overtook those people. But then at the same time, hundreds of years have gone by and the gun technology has evolved. Now you have semi-automatic weapons, to Eric's point, where people can walk into a fucking school that are psychotic and kill children. Children are dying because of the technological advances that have happened with weapons. And so then it becomes, well, what are the guns that should be available at all in the first place? And if we are needing to take guns away from the people, are we exchanging freedom? Are we exchanging security for liberty? And who should be in charge of that security? This is why this topic in general is so challenging. And then you have basically an identity game where you have on one side people saying, okay, we're not heartless, like we care about the fact that people are dying, children are dying, even people are dying in game-related like wars and fights. And at the same time, we can't exchange this liberty. And there's a different way to solve that problem. But on this other side, it's like, well, you're a heartless bigot and you care more about owning your guns than you do about people's lives. And that is not a conversation. There's no conversation happening there. And the conversation is where we meet in the middle and we actually look at the nuance of these issues and we say, like, maybe both of these are necessary and there's a way.
Yeah, and you kind of framed it up really well, why this discussion is really hard to have. And there's another reason why I think this discussion is difficult to have, because we have to ask ourselves, like, what question are we asking? What problem are we trying to solve? And I always, when looking at any problem, I try to tell myself, ask better questions, get better answers. And so we have to ask ourselves, what are we trying to solve for? Are we solving for less homicide by guns? Because if you look at all gun deaths, more than half of them come from suicide. More deaths from guns come from suicide than homicide. Okay, then you take that to the next step further. Are we looking for less homicide by guns in mass shootings? That's a much more specific question and a much more specific problem we're solving. And if we're trying to solve for less homicide, then you have to bring up the cold statistic that mass shootings are a very low percentage. I think in the best case, you're looking at 2.5% of all gun deaths.
Low percent compared to shootings in this country.
Right.
But when the rest of the world looks at this, they're like, you crazy motherfuckers. You're all
I mean, I
shooting
think
each other up.
it's far lower.
It is far lower. I took
Far
the
lower.
data that showed it at the highest percentage. So mass shootings, the data that was most generous in terms of like what is the biggest problem, showed that they're 2.5% of all gun deaths. And then you could take that question even further and more specific. Are we trying to solve for less homicide by guns and mass shootings using a semi-automatic rifle? And I think it's important to define what semi-automatic is. It means you pull the trigger, the bullet fires, and it automatic reloads. And I don't know if most people know this, but like an Armalite 15 does that, an AR-15 does that, but so does a handgun.
Yes.
So they don't actually fire at a more rapid pace. And
Correct.
so, I'm not trying to like make a specific point
No,
just
you're
yet.
saying something very important.
The question.
Nobody is even asking a question before they have the argument.
And that's why we
If you
talk
turn
past each
on,
other.
there's the complete talking past one another. If you turn on the news, if you have a conversation with a friend, the only conversation is you're a heartless fucker who just wants to protect the Second Amendment, and the other person is like, well, you're an idiot. You're not even asking the right question. But the reality is like there is, well, that's not quite the argument, but the reality is that is the question. What are we solving for? What are we solving for actually? Are we solving for less murder overall? And how do you even take that? Because it's pieces of different types of murder that are occurring. I'm asking you guys, what are we solving for?
I mean, if you look at mainstream, I think it depends on where you're looking. Like if you look at mainstream media, if you look at, what talking political heads say, we're trying to solve for this thing that just like hurts us in our hearts. Seeing mass shootings of like, at schools, it hits us different. And when you can look at the data, like we just talked about it, like more homicides come from handguns than Armalite 15s. There are more suicides that come from guns than homicides. And so you look at that data.
Do we want to prevent the most tragic murders first, maybe? Is that what you're saying?
It does have this like this thing that hits you harder, and it makes you pull this part of your brain in which you don't care about the data. But I think that as a person in power, you have to take a step back. And I would like to think that you would have a rational political actor and would say, okay, we understand this is a problem, this is a travesty, but like what problem? I wish they would set the conversation for.
So I agree with that like you don't want to solve the problem of like generally just like guns are bad, in general, because that's very extreme, before you solve the problem of like someone being able to walk into a school and kill 19 children. Like that's the first problem.
God, I hate even saying this, but
can we talk about that though? Because
yes,
there's no way to solve the problem of somebody walking into a school and killing 19 children unless you are going to like arm a bunch of people in the school and have all the security measures, which you could do, right? But we shouldn't like delude ourselves into thinking that the only reason all these kids are dead is because like guns exist, right? I think it's like a more nuanced thing. Like if somebody really wanted to go on a spree and kill people, right, and to kill kids, and all guns were gone.
Look, they could do it with a car like they did in France.
They could make a
last
bomb,
year,
right?
Yes.
Like, there's like a lot of terrible things that could be done.
Yes.
And this isn't to say that we shouldn't do anything. I'm just saying that like I'm trying to meet people halfway on this issue. Like my biggest problem with this whole thing. You related this to the abortion issue, and I think there's like a lot of strong parallels to it, right? Like one of my main problems with the abortion issue in particular, and I actually see this as like a thing in a lot of issues, and I am going to lay blame on one specific side here. I feel like the left in this country does not do a good enough job of actually understanding the beliefs and pain points and perspectives of people on the right. There's a tendency to just be like, these people are dumb, racist, gun-loving, child-hating idiots, and fuck them, and we're just gonna do whatever we can because like, and I don't own any guns, but I come from like a gun-owning household in like a rural area, and I'm like very in tune to why people have guns, right? And like, the people on the left, when they talk about guns, it's like, I understand why people on the right are basically like, screw you guys. Like, and that's interpreted as like, you don't care about kids. But the reality is like, we don't actually trust you and your intentions because like, what you were saying is like patently ridiculous, right? Ergo, you must have like ulterior motives, and they're like the trust in the government is already at all-time lows anyway. So you pair those two things together, and it's obvious to understand like why people reflexively react to this, right? Like this push to ban quote unquote assault weapons, whatever the fuck that means, right? Like it's like the essence of this term that was just made up to conjure emotion in people. That doesn't really. It basically just means scary looking gun, right? It's like a rifle that has like cosmetic things that make it sort of look like a machine. It's a silly descriptor, right? It's obviously made to like conjure up an emotional response, right? And if you look at these stats, right, sort of dispassionately, your goal is to prevent deaths? Well, okay, like I think in the recent FBI stats, like 400 people were killed with rifles, and like 20 times that number were killed with handguns. 20 times.
So I saw that number, and my next question was like, well, how many handguns are out there, and how many, rifles are out there?
That's a great follow-up. And what did you find?
I found that they're actually equal.
They're
roughly
the same.
Equal. Yeah,
the same amount of pistols. So the deaths per capita of gun and the deaths total are way higher on pistols.
But hold on. Like first there's cost, and then there's the fact that like walking into some place, especially if you're in a gang, like having a handgun like on your back or like under your jacket or in your pants is a lot easier than carrying around a rifle. You're carrying a rifle.
You're just arguing for my point.
Yeah, but I just want to distinguish that. Like I think it's very important.
I mean, this gets into the argument me and Eric got over at dinner. He was basically like equating lethality to like this thing is designed to kill people better, and I was like, lethality also has a component of like covertness to it, yes. Right? Like you can't walk around with a freaking rifle and not have people notice that you have a rifle. You can walk into a school with freaking 6 pistols strapped into you and nobody would know, right? Yes. There's an element of that makes that thing more lethal. There's a reason why we have this like distinction in the law of like concealed carry. Like there's an acknowledgement that the fact that you could have some hidden weapon be dangerous.
You're really driving at this idea that like if you're trying to solve the problem of murders, then banning this thing that we've titled these assault rifles, these assault weapons, is actually not getting to the root of the problem.
No, it's not. And like people on the right aren't stupid. They're like, okay, what's your motive? And like I remember the last election, like Beto O'Rourke, right? He finally slipped and came out and said, he's like, hell yeah, we're coming for your ARs and your and that's what everybody on the right believes. They believe they just want to take everybody's guns. And that is what people on the left believe, because if you really want to solve people dying, you're not going to confiscate this like symbolic gun that kills 300, 400. Like literally more people are killed per year by blunt objects and by like hands and fists than rifles, right?
Right.
Like it's so you're obviously not optimizing for saving lives. You're either optimizing for emotion, which I think is worth optimizing for to a degree, right? I don't totally discount that. It is horrible on the nation's psyche when you see kids killed, and they shouldn't just be like raw numbers, right? So I don't say that that's not a good thing to do, right? But like I think people on the left should just be honest. They should just be like, yes, we want to ban all guns. Let's have that debate. Instead, what they're trying to do is have this discussion where they're like, oh no, we don't want to ban all guns. We just want to ban these weapons of war that are obviously killing everybody. And then anybody with a brain just looks at the numbers and looks at what's going on. They're like, fuck you. No, you don't. Like, I don't trust you. I don't trust anything you're doing. So I am going to react against everything you do. And it's no wonder that like nothing gets done, because the left especially is being incredibly dishonest about their intentions. I think the right is probably a little naive and a little too into guns. Like I do think guns generally, in a general sense, are good.
For the right, the guns are very symbolic, and overly symbolic. But then, like Eric, you and I were talking about, I mean, and I have not really truly dug into this, but most genocides that have taken place in the world in the last 100 years took place after guns were taken away from their civilians, from society in general. Most of them within a year or two, some of them like, a decade later, but everything from Cambodia to everything, Pol Pot, everything that has taken place over the last basically 100 years, fell into that camp. And like, that tells you a lot in general, that when you give up that feeling of security to your country, to your politicians, to your government, and you trust them to take care of you, ultimately, we've talked about this so many times on the podcast, the more power you give up, it is a one-way road. And that's one of those things that I think, for good reason, again, I'm not, you know, I don't know how much we need to preface this. I'm not like some Republican, and I'm not some Democrat either.
Oh my God.
Like, no, because it's so easy for people to go, oh, he's starting to sound like a Democrat, or he's starting to sound like a Republican.
One of those
Someone who's
libtards.
new to this is like, which one is it? It's neither, and it's both in so many ways. Where I land on the issue ultimately is like, when I see some of the comments on Instagram and YouTube and social media, it tells me everything I need to know. When you see the case happen in the first place, you watch the debate, it just ensues, it erupts, right? And all of a sudden it becomes one side saying, you know, it's never about like the fundamental problem of the person and, you know, oh, you're scapegoating this issue by talking about the person and mental illness. But like, are we really? Should we not really be considering the fact that like a percentage of society is completely psychotic, like just clinically insane, and that we can't predict what they're going to do? Like, that is something we should be looking at and discussing. Is it not?
For sure. And I think like I definitely have a left field idea on it at some point. But like, you know, if I'm listening to this conversation and I'm trying to take the red team on this, and I'm trying to like, you know, like, okay, Stephen, to your point, you know, handguns do kill a lot of people. They kill more people than rifles. So I hear this argument a lot, and I don't know if I have like a good counter to it. I just like been observing it, is that why not take away all the guns? Look what Australia did. They took away all the guns.
Second Amendment. It's like a non-starter.
Yeah.
It's like a non-starter.
Exactly. So, you know, assuming, I don't think it's actually practical at all. It's like against the Constitution. Not. But like, but so is there an argument outside of it's not practical that like, you know, why don't we just take away all the? I don't believe this, but like, what if we just take away all the guns?
Well,
Like, look
the
at Australia.
argument around taking away all the guns, right? And this is important to understand about this country. Is this country, unlike any other country in the world I can think of, right, is founded from the idea that your rights as a human are just bestowed upon you as birth. They are natural, right?
Yes.
They're not granted to you by government, and government is instituted to protect those rights or to protect other people from you stripping them of those rights. And this is like a really important thing for people to understand, because this isn't something, as far as I'm aware, that exists like anywhere in Europe, or it certainly doesn't exist in Canada. I don't know who else has this thing, right?
Speaking of Canada, you guys saw.
Yeah,
right?
they banned handguns.
They're
right?
banning
They just,
handguns,
like,
and I need to read more
honestly
into
not
this, but
surprising given what we saw during the the whole Bitcoin trucker thing. But we don't have to get into
and
that.
possession of assault weapons.
Yeah, there's this idea that you are born with this right to be able to protect yourself and your family by sort of any means necessary. And we can argue what the limitations are on that, but certainly like having a pistol, especially if you're like a small woman, for example, like what other way can you really neutralize a large attacker than by being good with guns? Like from that perspective, like you can see why if you are taking that right away from somebody like that, you're basically saying you no longer have the right to live and survive that you were born with. That's a right we give you, and now the government will be there to give that to you. But anybody, it's really funny, like when all the BLM riots and everything happened during like peak COVID, I suddenly saw a lot of people around me being like, do you have a gun? How do I get a gun? Like, everybody lives in this like state that they think the world is this calm, peaceful place. But the truth is, like the hard truth is that the entire world like really does exist at all times, like on the edge of chaos, right? And that's not just in like a nuclear war sense. Like, I don't know, there could be some like meth head on crack downstairs right now, and like he's just lost his mind. He broke into this building and like he has a gun, right? Is it something? Make up whatever scenario you want. In all of those scenarios, by the time you call the police and they respond, you're done.
Well,
right?
Don't be in California, particularly San Francisco, for that.
Yeah, right. So like
Ain't nobody coming.
when people really are faced with that reality that like actually nobody is going to come to save them, and a lot of the policing and laws we have they're largely preventative, they're not reactionary.
Yes.
When something happens and you realize that you're just actually on your own, especially if you have a family, you got kids, you got a wife, and you're just like, well, I guess I just have a golf club or a baseball bat. I think a lot of people, when they realize that, and they realize like how little the police are actually there to come and save you, they do have this aha moment like we saw during those riots where they're like, it's the reason we saw gun ownership go through the roof, right? And I think in a society where we had higher trust of each other, higher trust of institutions, we can have lower aggregate gun ownership. But I don't see how we can get to that particular equilibrium given the state of society. So I think that we have to probably pursue other solutions that are going to be like a little bit of a compromise between the two sides, because neither side, especially the lefties, are going to get their wish. Like they're not going to just eradicate the Second Amendment tomorrow.
Can we talk a little bit about solutions? Like, I mean, there are some like...
I'm curious of solutions, but I was just also curious what you guys would guess are the causes. Like what's really going on here?
I mean, you're
this country.
You're alluding to more than just like guns being the purpose that we're seeing.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
I mean, I'll throw out my like kind of left field,
sure,
solution.
I'm genuinely curious, man. Like, why this country? Like, sure, it happens around the world, and sure there are. We are one of the biggest countries in the world, but like, why? Why so much? Why so frequently? Why so tragically and horrifically?
Yeah, I mean,
like fucking school kids. Like, why? Why does that happen?
I mean, we can get into like other solutions like background checks and things like that in a second, but like, and this is a very much half-baked argument. Like, I don't know if I fully subscribe to this.
Love it already.
Yeah, like, and I need you guys to kind of like help me either build this argument or like take it down. But you look at a lot of these perpetrators. They are young men of adolescent to young age, and they all seem to be troubled to some aspect. And I kind of bring it back to like somewhat of broken homes. Like I think most of us were lucky enough to grow up with a mother and father in the home, and I think that provides stability. It provides somewhat economic stability. It provides some moral stability. It provides like guidance, as you're kind of like formulating your worldview as a young adolescent. Okay, so now this is where this gets a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah, stretch me.
Okay, so like I do think there are some welfare and child support programs that incentivize fatherless homes. So there are... if you look at like when the war on poverty started in like 1964, and you see, like the amount of like fatherless homes or like the number of single parents.
There's an incentive here.
It 5Xs. And now, there used to be like a few programs. Now there are dozens of programs. And if you look at where that aid goes, it primarily goes to single parents. That's where this money goes. It doesn't go, for example, if you have, let's say, a low income mother with a child in their home, if she happens to go marry a employed husband, then her share of that like welfare and child support goes down. So I do think there is something to like, we do have these like war on poverty programs that kind of incentivizes, single parents to not basically combine households. There is like a financial incentive.
That's way too logical and data driven.
Well,
but like
I don't think
it's a
you're
stretch.
wrong. I think it's too narrow. I think what you are talking about fits under a larger umbrella of sort of this general, like, I want to use the Marianne. What was that Marianne Williamson quote? The deep psychic trauma or that she came out with in a debate. But I think there's something to that. There's this general like crisis of
however
meaning
narrow
and everything,
it may
right?
be, though, because I agree with this point, and I would build.
It's
on
more
this.
of a question than a point.
No,
argument,
but I think it's a good place to build from. However narrow it is, I think it is a factor. It is a factor for sure among a massive number of factors that, for me, I think it's not just troubled people and kids. I think it's deeply fucking sick, disturbed motherfuckers. I think if we're talking about these people as if they're normal, we're the problem. Like, that's how extreme I am on this issue. Like, I really fundamentally believe a person that wants to kill other people for pleasure who've done absolutely nothing wrong to them is a sick human being. Who, by the way, like, it just exists in society. And the fact that it doesn't happen more is actually it's like a thank God thing for me.
He was posting videos on the internet holding up bags full of dead cats, right? He was an actual psychopath. It's really I think it is worth asking, like, why can a kid like that at the age of 18 walk in and buy a gun? I think a lot of people on the right use the argument like, oh, you can serve in the military when you're 18, ergo you should be able to buy a gun. That to me is like a really dumb argument from the right. Like, the barrier to going through the military, sure, I agree with that. If you go through the equivalent training and screening process of the military at the age of 18, you can get a gun. Like, I think as a default rule, you probably shouldn't be able to get a gun until you're like 21 or 25 or whatever the number is, right? I think there should be exceptions to that rule where you can argue to a particular board and like I know that people on the right hate the idea of having these checks or licenses because it opens up an avenue for the government, who you don't trust in the first place, to be like, yeah, we don't actually think that, we think you're crazy. You can't buy a gun. And you're like, but I'm not crazy. They're like, no, we think you're crazy. And then, so I understand where that's coming from. But we have like this sort of like due process of law all over the place in the world, right? Like, police can't come into the home right now and just bust down the store. But if they go through a process and get a warrant,
I like where you're going.
They can, right? So
I had a feeling we would go really deep and hard on this topic. So let's go solutions and wrap it up, like, if we have any, and maybe we revisit this.
I think solution very high level, right? No guns, and like I think at a young age, yes, I think anybody can have a gun, but the bar you have to cross to get that gun is determined on like it's higher the younger you are, right? I think everybody to have a gun probably needs to pass some sort of like training. There needs to be somebody who in that training can be like, this guy seems a little off, and like tip off a little red flag for you to go to further psychiatric evaluation, right? It's going to make guns more expensive because you're probably going to have to initiate some tax to fund this, which I kind of hate, but it's a trade-off. It's a compromise. I think it has to be done. We can't just have we obviously can't have like random disturbed 18-year-olds who are murdering cats. That guy passed a background check. These young kids, they all pass background checks. They're too young to not pass a background check, but their brains are disturbed and young and not developed, and they're impulsive, and like we can't give them like semi weapons of war without having it. It's obviously
I just
stupid.
worry, like,
what are you worried about? Tell me.
People like that, man, either A, get them off the black market, or B, pass that background check by being a fucking psycho, by playing the character, by just being like, nah, I'm cool, I'm good, let's go.
Some of them will slip through, but like you're going to reduce this kid. If you took one look at his social media, you'd be like, oh, dead cats in a bag. Probably shouldn't have a gun.
Yes, I'm not arguing against harder. I mean, California is known for having some of the most strictest gun laws.
Eric, please jump in.
Yeah, please do.
Where I want to, I think we avoided what I think is the biggest point of this whole thing, and I want to see if there's consensus, at least among the four of us, is like, do we even think that like gun ownership is necessary for the security against this like rare and like 4 standard deviation long tail case where like the government can turn against its citizens? I think that's actually the first step that we never crossed that. I
think that's the second step. First step is your innate right to self-defense.
Never revisited that one. I want to visit that, and once we do, then we can start to get into the nuance of like, okay, so if that is logical, then let's talk about mitigating the actual cost first. Because everything we've talked about is like about mitigating the actual cost in terms of like lives lost today in reality for this potential use case. But we haven't really like discussed that one. Like, do you guys believe in that?
Yeah.
I don't disagree with you. I think it's the secondary use case. I think the primary use case is that you, as an individual born into the world in the wild with your family and yourself, have a right to defend yourself and your family. But I do totally agree with the idea that like government, generally speaking, grows, accumulates power, and then oftentimes seeks to oppress its citizens. And like, if you look through history over and over again, the very first thing a lot of these tyrannical people do is they confiscate all the guns, right? And a lot of people during COVID, right, were
Russia,
looking at Australia
China.
being like, they gave up their guns. Now they're in internment camps. See? And like, I get
There
it.
is a point
I get,
there.
That would never happen here. Would
Right.
never
Hell no.
happen
So
here.
what
Never.
I want to say is that like the framing of this whole conversation, and the reason why I bring this up is because I had this conversation with my fiance on the freaking drive over to Wyoming, and it was cordial and whatever, but like it showed the difference. And Mina is like very clear that she doesn't want guns, and I'm very clear that like, well, you know, governments can turn against their people. Look at where you're from. Like, she's born in Iran, and the
They have no
Ayatollah has its
Well, I can't
thumb
say that.
on the populace, and it's pressing harder and harder and harder, and they are not allowed to have guns. And I'm like, just
What are they allowed to have?
nothing. Like, you know, like the government presses harder and harder and harder, and I'm just thinking like, you don't see this? And she said, she's like, okay, well, that's a good framing, but we are paying a cost in the interim. And I'm like, yes, we are. And that cost is not just dollars. That cost is
Freedom isn't free.
lives. And that's not to be downplayed. And then where we got to is that she believes that the actual cost today is higher than the potential cost of where the potential could go if the government turns against its people. And I think that's actually a fair conversation. Like, that's
I
actually,
mean, in terms of like actual probabilities, it's probably like a positive EV, like, you know, maybe in a short time run, but over a longer time period.
I
like
think that's the
could see-
conversation we have.
But millions of people usually end up dying.
Exactly. And I do think there's a huge recency bias. Like, we did see, you know, like 8-year-olds get fucking killed. And in the United States, we haven't seen its government turn against its people. So we're like, oh, well, that would never happen until it does. And you're like, oh, wait, we need guns. You know, like,
Okay, but what you're talking about is the central trade-off between the West and like China, right? It is a question of optimizing for the collective versus optimizing for the individual. When you optimize for the collective, in aggregate, you have less of this, you have less of this, you have less of this. The trade-off is that you, as an individual who wants to make their own decisions and have freedom and their own autonomy, pay the price, right? I'm not saying one of these things is inherently good or inherently bad. It's probably some shade of gray in between. Obviously, I lean individualistic, but that is the trade-off. Do you optimize for the collective good or the individual?
Here's another simple frame. It's like, how many times has there been a society that has given up its arms and things have gone to shit? Many. How many times has a society, you know, given up its arms and gotten them back? Never. Like, when does, and in order to do so, it's not even a question of getting the arms back. It's a question of getting out of the thumb on top of them because they're living in a tyrannical society. What does that take to get out of? A complete, bloody, millions of people dying civil war.
So, I mean,
There's only one way out.
let's say we all agree on that part. And then to your point, Eric, is like, well, how do we decrease the cost? Like, so if we accept that as like, how do we decrease the cost? And I'll kind of rattle down my like quick, you know, solutions or like potential things, and maybe you guys can go too, and we can wrap it up.
Let's do it and go to jerking off from here.
Shit. All right.
Just literally go from guns to
Up
jerking
next, wanking.
So there are Jesus. This is terrible.
Did that shock you? Because that's what I wanted.
Okay, guys.
That's what I was hoping for, was
All
to
right.
kind of wake you up a little more.
Eric is
Just
gonna owe-
absolutely no blood in your penis, and then all of a sudden it was just like, whoa, Jimmy. Okay.
All right, Eric's going to owe penance for selling his optimism coin. We're going to owe a lot more penance for this discussion we're having and what's going to happen after this. I mean, like, listen, background checks exist in this country, but there are very clear loopholes. And I think most gun owners agree with this. So 22% of gun owners bought their most recent gun without a background check. 80% of firearms acquired for criminal purposes use those loopholes. And so if you look at the national federal background check laws, they require licensed sellers. And that is a fairly restrictive term and what falls under a licensed seller. So there are gun expos, there are private sellers. There even this term of like casual private sellers. Like I occasionally sell guns to the public and for personal use, but I'm not a gun store. And so with that, there are these loopholes that we can very easily close to take care of, and we're not talking about the mentally ill, we're talking about the people who have a criminal record, all right? So that's one. I think that's part of it. And Stephen mentioned, in terms of like you mentioned red flags. Well, there are red flag laws, and I think they should be more integrated into schools. Like schools should have it part of like, I don't know, teacher training potentially to say like how to use the red flag laws, how to identify someone who potentially should be put on this red flag list, which means, maybe authorities take a look and they are not able to purchase a gun. And there's all kinds of like false positive arguments against that. But let's just say like that could do well. The community around that person is probably the best, even their family members to gauge whether that person should be on a red flag law. Now there's another part which I'm kind of like on the border of, but like my professional background is in ad serving technology. And I've found that ad serving technology is incredibly good about finding what people are about to do. They know if they're about to buy a car. They know if they're about to have a baby. And everyone has experienced that thing where an ad gets shown. It's like, how the hell did they know I was going to purchase that? And I've even worked with a nonprofit where we found a way to tell if people are going to be what we phrased jihadist intenders based upon their search volume. We worked on a nonprofit called...
Can you target that in Google?
You can. If someone is searching for how do I get to...
go to the White House to speak on that? Like...
No. The nonprofit went to the White House to speak on this.
I love this angle, by the way. I've never heard this before.
Okay, so like a jihadist intender, you might like look at a search like how do I get to Syria? That would be like we're gonna put them in the potential jihadist intender, and there are ways to do this, and we can prove this through like commercial means, and we've all experienced this I think personally. So what I'm saying is that ad technology companies, particularly Google, Facebook, there's probably a few others, can probably tell that someone is intending, down this path. And like, I really don't like the idea of like even giving technology companies the idea to even like potentially suggest someone to get on a red flag law. I'm just saying that like technology kind of exists to predict what people will do. And there's a whole massive multi-billion-dollar economy built around that technology, being accurate. So like, is there a way to integrate that? I don't know. That's like politically and socially like palatable. But like, I think that the raw technology does exist. And then I agree with, yeah, it is scary. But anyway, I do agree with you on the 21 or older thing too. I'm kind of like that makes sense. So I don't know. Those are my three things. Like, I think like most people can agree on the technology part, kind of scary, but a potential.
Solutions, quick ones. You don't have to have one.
I'm generally.
I think it's
I'm generally on the Spider-Man line. Like with great power comes great responsibility. Like when you have a gun, you have the power to take away multiple human lives within a little flick of your finger, right? And yes, that may be inherent to you for quote unquote defense, right? But there has to be an acknowledgement that power can be used for evil, and that like we have to find some balance of granting you that power, but acknowledging the limitations of it. I don't think it's unreasonable to increase the age of ownership, or at least increase barriers with younger age, right? And I don't think it's like particularly obtrusive to have some sort of like certification program that people have to go to. I understand that it's going to be like expensive, but like this country is like very rich and guns aren't really that expensive, to be honest, right? So I think some combination of like a tax on guns plus maybe like a public subsidy to it would be a good compromise, because gun owners are paying a little bit, and then also the non-gun owners are paying a little bit to kind of like make that happen, right? Yeah. And then there has to be due process around that, right? Like there can't just be one bureaucracy that can ban you from getting a gun where there's no appeal. It has to be similar to the same process that has the ability to like put you in jail and lock you away for life, right? We do have a process for doing that, much more severe than you owning or not owning a gun, right? So I think we can take some elements of the regular judicial process, put it towards the gun thing. We can incorporate some of the red flag stuff, Nick check. Like people should in society at some point be able to at least like tag you, like, just in case there's a little tag, right? So at least people look into it. It's mildly dystopian, but it's also very dystopian to just have 18-year-olds walking into schools and shooting up elementary kids, right? Everything's dystopian everywhere. We're gonna find some middle ground to make it, on average, like a little less dystopian. And like I said earlier, people on the left have to speak to people on the right better. They have to stop making these pure arguments from like emotion. They have to like argue for the actual thing that they want, say what they actually want, because people aren't stupid, and they should like learn a little bit more about guns, right? Like I'm guessing if you polled 50% of people who want like gun bans, they probably think the AR and AR-15 stands for assault rifle, right? So it's like very hard for gun owners to like look at these people and be like, oh, you want to regulate me, and you don't know shit about like what it means to have a gun, own a gun, or anything, right? I get the frustration from the right? So that's my rant.
CFA.
So everybody here made great points today why pistol ownership and AR-15 ownership are both very dangerous, and I think like it doesn't even make sense to compare the two anymore. Like I've stepped off my pedestal on that. Stephen, thank you for your enlightenment and for all the F-bomb.
R-bombs.
R-bombs. So I think what is clearer to me now is that it's about restriction, like access restriction. So what that means is probably like, it's not just background checks, it's like current mental health checks. So it's not all backward looking, it's like today looking. And then it's also like maybe an age restriction. And maybe it's like, basically the bottom line where I'm saying is like, it doesn't matter if it's a pistol or an AR-15. I applied for a global entry membership with the United States government, and I'm going through a 6-month waiting process. I got to go to a live interview. I got to do all this crap. And somebody can go to Walmart and buy a gun, and maybe those two things should look a little similar, is what I mean.
Bro, to cross from the United States to Mexico in a car requires something called Sentry, right? It's like a land border crossing. The current wait time is 9 months. 9 months processing.
But you don't have a Bill of Rights right to go to Mexico.
So I'll wrap this with something that I love that. I'll wrap this with something.
Actually, it's not even in the Bill of Rights, isn't it? It's probably in the original Constitution. Oh God, I feel dumb now.
You're not dumb.
I'm sorry.
It's in the
Constitution.
You're a brilliant man with a chip in the brain, as Hoffman
Had
said.
too much wine.
Look, one of the challenges that I personally have, and one of the ways in which I get caught up in these things, is like everything we've talked about is like a micro solution to a micro problem today. It's nothing but nonsensical, small thinking, tribalistic wars and identity politics over matters that to me are really not going to resolve themselves at all. It's just going to be this constant conflict and back and forth, and one side is going to feel like it got a win over the other. But in the long tail trajectory of like, are we evolving over time? I think we're asking the wrong questions. If a society that was here today, sitting right next to me, a man or a woman or a whatever gender they want to call themselves, I mean, and I don't mean that in a facetious way. I really, truly don't. I have no idea what human beings are going to look like in 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, was looking at us, they would say, you're being insane. You're asking the wrong questions. You're fundamentally looking at the problem the wrong way. I think that when you're designing society to be peaceful, harmonious, loving, not killing each other, this is one of the 10 commandments from 2,000 years ago. Don't kill each other. It's that simple. Just don't fucking kill each other.
Got it.
Where is that going?
I'm sorry.
Where is that going? Oh, you got it wrong. You're not supposed to kill each other.
Oh, so stupid.
When you have that from 2,000 years ago and you still have that problem that exists today, fundamentally there's an issue at root with people. There's an issue at the core of like what it means to be human if that still exists. And so the wrong questions are being asked. So the question I would actually be asking is maybe somebody out there in our Discord, maybe somebody out there in our wider community has a deeper, more thoughtful, not just even answer, but question to the problem of like, how do you shape a society to be peaceful and harmonious, knowing that like, in my opinion, there is no utopia. There is no place and world in which death does not exist. Death is a part of life. Tragedy is a part of life, and so is conflict. Conflict is a part of life. So the game here is to reduce conflict between nations, reduce conflict between these arbitrary lines that we drew in the sand that we call borders and countries and nation states, to reduce the conflict between individuals all the way from the level of the earth or maybe even perhaps the intergalactic and down. Because if we're really fucking talking about a society that exists 100 or 200, 300 years from now, and Elon's vision comes true, we're talking about potentially interacting with other civilizations, maybe if there are any out there, and then you go one layer down and you say, okay, you got countries. Why do we have countries in the first place? And then you go another layer down and you say, why do we have cities? Why do we have different ordinances and laws that exist between these different places? Okay, so what are we really trying to solve for here? We're trying to not die. We're trying to not kill each other on the way to evolution. I think that somebody out there can jump in with me and ask these types of questions, because those are the types of questions that when you narrow down that North Star and you say, what am I really driving toward here? Because I'm really on board with you, Nick. Like, what's really the question here? But not the question of today, the question of tomorrow, the question of where we're going. Because if we don't know where we're going and we don't know what we're building, what's the fucking point of it all? We're just arguing over bullshit in order to get to where. So if we just identify where we're trying to go in 100, 200, 300 years from now, maybe then we can actually debate over things that matter. That's my take on this whole thing. I think that
beautiful.
we're
Every time
smart.
Armand rants, I just want to go like,
Oh man.
imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try.
I don't know what the fuck that is, but I love it.
So
Anyone
we're,
doesn't
my
notice, we
romance
had
novel?
3 hours of audio set up that involved drinking in it.
Oh my God.
It's escalated.
yeah, we're
So,
hours into
thank
this.
you.
Should we do the third segment or should we
A
save
plus
it?
rant.
Oh, we're not that far in.
We're gonna just do the third segment. If people want to like stop listening, they can stop listening.
So I thought I was just trying to end it on a high note with the guns, you know?
Okay,
That was
all
great.
right,
No,
Before we literally leap over to talking about being 9 years old and whacking it with your black box, you know, in the middle of the night. So we have a problem. Yeah, we have a problem.
What's the problem?
The problem is that, well, there's multiple layers to this problem. The problem is that porn is more prevalent than ever before. The internet is faster than ever before. We're watching this shit in...
or great?
Well, first of all...
Nice to be on.
Bug or feature?
Yeah. Actually, yeah, thank
I'm
you
sorry,
for the
keep
help with
going.
the positioning. No. First, I think there is a right way to frame this. What is really the problem here? We do have certain problems. We have a problem with, God, I mean, I don't want to say birth rates because that's a whole other can I don't want to open. We have a problem with like decreasing virginity.
Send it. Just send.
You mean increasing virginity?
Let's just talk about porn. Let's just generally talk about it and see where it goes.
Let's talk about it. I mean, there is a
Just
battle
generally
brewing.
talk
Like
about
people, I think a lot of people don't see the battle brewing, right? Like I listen to my share of conservative podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I like to feel what's going on in the world, you know, from all sides. All the things. I don't want to tip my hand.
stuff or
There's no conservative porn podcast
Ministers,
as far as
bro.
I know. But this is actually
Ministers of
this is
truth.
actually a thing that people are talking about on the right, and I told you guys
so
that.
open with this.
Yeah, like J.D. Vance, right? He's a Senate candidate from Ohio, author of Hillbilly Elegy, which was recently made into a movie. He's really like kind of like becoming like the populist voice of this sort of middle America right voter, right? Like he called recently for like a federal ban on porn, saying it was sort of destructive to the family, yada, yada, yada. And then I was telling you guys, I saw on the actual official Republican Party platform, they say that porn is, quote unquote, a public health crisis.
Public health crisis.
Public health crisis. So I was curious to get all of your view on this. I think Nick doesn't have like any particularly strong.
It's
He doesn't want to talk about
No,
the
on
fact that
this.
he winks it three times a day. It's okay. Like, it's okay, bro. I
No,
know
I-
you have a problem.
I just think this
we'll
is like
keep it. We'll keep it behind the pod.
It's a very like simple like I don't know solution. I don't know simple like perspective on it. Maybe you guys have more complex perspectives on this, but like the idea is that like less is better. Like porn has been scientifically proven to like hyper stimulate like unnatural amounts of dopamine in your brain, and that's not good. And it's probably not good for your brain. It's probably not good for your relationship. So in general, less is better. And I'm not saying like and also like
Can we just apply that to heroin as well?
Can I
You
just
could,
apply that to
but
alcohol? You fuck
is better.
mezcal junkie.
But I'm just saying, like, in terms of like JD Vance, no, you shouldn't ban it. Like we just talked about, like having freedoms to own a gun. Like you should have
Absolutely
freedom
insane.
to look at porn.
Let's step back
whatever you
from the
want.
federal
It's not
ban.
that. I don't think this
little out
discussion's
there.
that complicated.
It's the far, right? I think we can maybe argue some. I could try to steel man it if I wanted to like really get out there. Let's go to the public health. Do you
What
feel like
is
porn is
the
a
public health problem?
crisis?
What is the crisis?
I mean, I actually kind of agree with the.
I thought you
Public
really
health
agreed. So
crisis
bring it. Like,
statement?
what is the thing that you agree with about this?
Talk about
like,
the public
I-
health problem.
Yes.
No, I generally, I am sympathetic to the sort of religious right argument that like porn is like this like terrible thing that's a scourge on society. I kind of
37
kind
years
of
old,
think
you
it's
got no
true.
Where are you?
Kind of think it's true. It's just wanking it to
Bro,
blurry videos
porn?
on my black box. Yeah, I know, but like
no, really. Tell me, like, what is the issue here for like a public health issue?
In all seriousness, like I think it's like mental heroin. If heroin was like, well, I guess we have fentanyl. It's like mental fentanyl.
So is it just
what
like
it is.
people are walking around overly stimulated and mentally high all the time?
It is like, as a human, I don't think there's anything more primal or like, other than the desire to breathe and eat up to a particular point. I don't think there's anything more of like a driving force, like in men especially, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would even argue that like eating is only up to a point of survival, and then you'd probably switch over to the sex, right? I think
Yes.
like most men would just, if they had like a million girls being like, please take me now, they would only eat the minimal amount to like stop
the
their heart
energy
from
to
beating,
fuck.
to kind of,
yeah.
like all the bowls you hear about
Yeah.
and everything, right?
I agree with that.
Good
I
point.
agree with that. I think it's a massive. I think it's a problem.
Can I throw some funny stats? I don't know if they're
Please.
funny or sad. I was researching this a little bit. I was like looking up some stats. Pornhub, biggest site in the world, 3.5 billion visitors a month. That's
People
more than
forget that,
Netflix,
by the way.
more than Amazon.
The
But
biggest-
Pornhub isn't
No,
just
no,
Pornhub.
Site in the
Sorry,
world.
that's not the right. 3.5 million visitors.
Billion.
Billion. Okay.
Billion.
The biggest
And Pornhub is
porn site in the world.
that is they're top 10 biggest websites in the entire world. But in reality, they're bigger because Pornhub is a part of this conglomerate, MindGeek, and they own all these other sites that also have massive traffic. So 3.5 billion visitors a month. Sounds like a lot. It is a lot, right? But the stats get worse. They do this like year in review every year where it's just this kind of like
It's really
fun
good.
thing. But then you read it and you're like, this is actually kind of fucking disturbing. They show you like the top terms searched by everybody, which I went through, and I was like, oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, no. The North America thing is like everyone's trying to fuck their stepsister.
Here's actually I have the updated search. You might.
I
be
got thoughts
interested
on
in
that
this.
too.
But like every minute of the year, 11,000 hours of video was watched. Every minute of last year, the entire world cumulatively watched thousand hours of porn just on Pornhub. 12,500
The
gigabytes
problem.
of data
Honey's
per
watching
minute
1 minute an
was
hour.
transferred. If you watched all the videos uploaded last year, you would have to start in the year 1850 to end up in the present day by the time you watch them all, right? It's kind of insane. And there's some stuff that's like really sad. Like the average age a kid watches porn now is now below 11.
Whoa.
And it's
Really?
not like, and they're not watching, they're not opening like a dirty
Well,
Playboy magazine
I would have done
anymore.
that. I would have done that. I was watching like, literally shit that
When
was just
you
like
and I grew up,
breaking
porn
up on
was
the
like you had to tweak your TV and there was some grainy
It's
thing.
hitting
and like
the
maybe
fucking
you
cable
saw a
box.
nipple. These kids aren't seeing that. They're seeing like just straight up,
Yeah.
boom,
4K,
direct
baby.
mainline,
Okay,
weird
Here,
shit.
yeah,
you
this is
know?
where we stand. What do you boys think? I mean, let's get into where. What do you guys think?
I want one of you to argue with me why this isn't like the worst thing ever for humanity. Because like I kind of feel like in aggregate, as a general rule, it's terrible.
All right, so let's say
I don't want to say worst thing ever, but it's really bad. It's worse than all of the. I will say it's worse than all of the drugs we.
what do you
want
want to do? You want to regulate porn?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I do.
No.
I do. I do.
No.
I mean, we can get into that after, but I want
Okay, so-
to hear you like yell at me.
so
first.
let's follow
Yell
your
at me.
argument. So like I agree that like porn is bad for your brain, and porn is potentially bad for your relationship as well. So like, take me the next step further. Why it's much more worse? Do you think
I can
there's
do
like
all kinds of things that are bad for me. I don't need the government to regulate them. Just
like-
like everything else we always talk about.
Perfect.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up that argument.
Because like I'm literally drinking mezcal next to you. We've been smoking fucking puff bars all
We're gonna
night.
go back to the prohibition.
Exactly. Like we can do all these things that are not good for you, but they feel good.
Look, take you want like a response to that. Look, like is porn as an addiction overall, when you're doing too much of it, bad for you? Oh my God, we can talk about that for hours. Fundamentally, you don't fuck the same, you don't think the same, you don't love your girlfriend or boyfriend the same. And by the way, I am talking to men and women. There are plenty of women that have porn addictions, but they have them in different ways. Some women just want to sit around and come 4 times a day, and they can, and it's a lot easier for them. And men, how many times a day do you really need to ejaculate to feel good about yourself? For me, once every 5 to 7 days, and my brain keeps working. I keep the fucking, I'm talking seriously about you guys. And I'll tell you guys my rule. We said how personal were we going to keep it, how open were we going to keep
No,
it.
tell me
I'll be honest with you. I've had
everything.
enough wine.
Tell me
I think it's actually really important. So I do want to share. Every 5 to 7 days for me, in general, like when we're actually really what we're really talking about here is how often are you actually as a man, we're just talking specifically to men, ejaculating. I think if you're having sex as often as you like and is normal in your relationship is completely okay. Where things get sticky, no pun intended, is when you're doing it outside of your relationship. Am I saying don't do it outside of your relationship? No, I am not. No, I am not. I am saying if you do it more often than you're having sex with your partner, you're missing out on sex that you would be having with your partner because you're jerking off to girls that don't actually exist. They exist in that fucking metaverse, which is about to get weirder and weirder and weirder. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to change hair colors, and they're going to have funny little fucking features that are going to be impossible for the woman that you find in your life to ever recreate. And so what happens to you? You become numb. To Steven's point, why is this really a public health crisis? Because you become numb, because you can't actually be attracted anymore to the person that you think you want to be with. And if you can't be attracted to them, then your relationship suffers. And you know what happens if your relationship suffers? Then maybe you won't ever have a baby with that person. Maybe you won't ever procreate with that person. I think there's really fundamentally issues there where like, or maybe even before that, you never even find that person because this porn addiction found you at 13. And so really like another one of the subtopics here is the whole virginity thing.
The rising
right?
case
the
of
rising
virginity.
case of virginity that none of us, thank God, ever had to deal with. But it was like, for us, it was normal, like by the time you're in high school, to get laid, you know, at least by then. But now what's happening is you have Snapchat, you have TikTok, you have porn. And the best you can do to feel connected to a girl is send a text. And that's like erotic. It's like, ooh, yeah, she kind of fucking sexted me.
And imagine where it's going.
And
when we
that's
get
it.
into imagine where we're going in the metaverse. Like, it's only going more and more that direction. Like, so how are we even like sustain our civilization when this transition happens, right? If we still believe that that's going to happen, which I think we all do, like, where is this going?
Yeah, I mean, there is a real case there. There is a real case there where it becomes harder to like procreate, like, because you're just so caught up in like the ultimate fucking fantasy with 3 women with your VR headset on in the future, which may only be a year or 2 away. Like, I mean, most these days, like, most people don't really watch porn that way. Like, most people don't. But like, if in 2 to 3, 4 years, that's the preferred way to watch porn, and it's better than real life, and we start to get like this.
What do you mean if it's better than real life? Like, porn is already better than real life for like a lot of people. That's why there are all these drop-offs, right?
It's better up here. It's not better down here yet. It still feels
your
better.
Your brain is the thing that like matters. That's where all the little chemicals are released that make you feel good. Like, that is the problem. That's where all the crack receptors are.
I just still can't take the jump to like public health crisis here. So like, I agree that like population decline is a very much of a public health and an economic crisis, but I don't think that like porn is the primary driver of that. Like, so I feel like I still haven't heard the best argument for like why it's a public health crisis.
I don't think the public health crisis is the JD Vance, like, oh God, we're not starting enough families thing. Like that, I get where he's coming from. He's like a religious right guy. I do think that we are kind of destroying families and that sort of thing to a degree. I see that point of view. Like, to me, the public, and you guys are talking about like, I hear this argument a lot, right? Like, oh, I'm in my room, just fucking, and who cares? Why do you care what I do?
And they don't.
Right?
And a lot of these guys, and if you're out there listening and you don't leave your room, like,
why do you care?
Bro, jump in the Discord. Let's
And-
talk crypto. Like, get out there.
Hey,
Come
give
to
a
a
little
meetup.
rent in our Discord.
Yeah.
Like, I understand that a lot of people are out there like, fuck you, Steven. You want to close the door behind you. You get your like your beautiful girlfriend. You're like, you can't jerk it to some blah 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 in your room. And I get that, right? So I don't want to be like, this is blanket terrible for everybody. Nobody should ever do that. I'm just saying, like, it is dangerous, and we don't acknowledge the danger of it, and we actually like glorify it to a large degree in society, which I think is very dangerous, right? And to get back to what I was saying earlier, we talk about it as though it's this like it's the same as you drinking in your room, right? When you drink Makers, right, your consumption of the Makers, even though it might kill you if you drink too much of it, it doesn't have any impacts on the rest of society, right? Your increased demand for Makers means that somebody makes more Makers or Bookers or whatever the hell your alcohol of choice is.
It does also
right?
mean that you might die. And that is...
It does, but you dying is your own choice, right? But there are other things we do in this world that
And so
do
is
have...
you jerking yourself off into obliteration until you never
Right,
have feeling
but
in your penis
when you
again.
allow this stuff to proliferate, you create a demand for it. There's a huge market for it, and then it's completely ungated, and it can get in the hands of like, there's literal like 8-year-olds who have phones who get like addicted to this stuff at a stage of their life where their brain is super plastic, right?
Yes.
And then it forms in a particular way, and they
Okay,
can
now
never
you're
get
getting
over
to
this.
something I think
Like-
is interesting.
Like,
And I
if
agree
you
with.
go to like Reddit, like there's like a whole like actual, I don't know if you guys know this, but this is like huge internet sub community of like anti-porn, like they call it like NoFap on Reddit, whatever, right? It's a bunch of people who have kind of gotten together collectively and been like, holy fuck, like I'm literally like a heroin addict that's like destroyed my life. And they all support each other and try to get over it. Like, if you read some of this stuff, it's like heartbreaking. There are literally 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds who are impotent.
Of course.
At 13.
Of course.
Like 13, like a light breeze
There
gave me a
is
boner.
no
Just like
more. There is
girl
no
walked
more.
by with like one like slight nipple in her like lopsided boob.
It's the
boner.
most
Just, like,
tragic
everything.
rabbit hole of all.
13, I had a boner every 40 seconds. Like,
Nah,
there's nothing
man.
I could do about it.
No, because the best you had was a fucking weird ass TV or a magazine or half a boob or Nat Geo. You know, like that's what you had. And what they have, to Steven's point, is high definition fucking, man. And it is
on,
crazy what you can
High grade,
access.
concentrated.
There's like
Brain
a
crack.
lack of
It's like
testosterone or
unbelievable.
something.
Absolutely, there is.
Of course
way
there
down.
is.
And that could be partly environmental, and part of the environmental piece could be porn.
Food based could be a lot of
food
it.
based, could be in the air, could be the chemicals in your fucking cleaning, could be the fact that people don't lift as much, could be the fact so many things, right? And we've talked about this many times, but like one major factor for sure is like you're not supposed to watch that much porn and ejaculate that often. Like that's not normal at all. Because what's normal is, like, let's just go back 100 years. What would it be 100 years ago? It would be through sex, and in adolescence, it would be maybe through jerking off, but it would be like in your brain and in your head and through your imagination.
Yeah, I still like I'm here. I'm listening to you guys talk about the problem, but I don't understand how it's a public health crisis. And
It's
I
a
certainly
public health
that was just an
crisis
opening.
because we are systematically destroying millions of young kids' ability to like have like healthy interactions with women for the rest of their life, because at their most formative process of their brains, they're consuming this shit, and it's like warping their perception of everything.
Wow, I thought I was gonna
Steven believes that every fetus is a human life, so he believes that every semen cell is a human life.
like
No, it's not related to that. Like, look, I'm gonna be personal with you guys for a second. I didn't grow up.
I'm the only one fucking just laying it all out by
I
the way.
wasn't born. I wasn't 12, and I was like, I hate boobs. I'm never gonna look at them on the internet. Like when I was young, I had a computer in my room, and I got connected to the internet, and like I
what?
discovered. I know I had the internet
You
when
had
I was
the-
like 11. I finally got it.
The king, sound.
And like
yeah.
I started watching this shit, right? And I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. Like everybody around me was like, "Oh no, it's great. Explore yourself." Blah 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 blah. And I was like, "Yeah, it's totally fine." And like I thought my mom was like a religious, like, "Oh no, God's gonna punish you if you wank it," you know. And so I was like, "Nah, fuck that." And then like I realized like kind of like later in life that like I was like I had like a little bit of a problem, right? And I don't think like I was any more than a lot of other people, but like I remember very distinctly I like started dating this girl in Boston when I was like 21 or 22, and like I took her, you know, home one night, and we went out on a date, and like came back, and we tried to do it, and I had a couple drinks, and I was like, it didn't quite like work, and I was like, guess I was drunk. And then I was like sober a different day, and it happened again, and then I was like,
Ooh,
wait a minute.
what's going on here?
What's going
Basil?
on here?
Juicy. This is juicy, Steven.
This is the most personal Steven has ever
So-
been. Ever.
He's
outside
more
of
willing
even
to
the
share with the
podcast.
bankless
This is-
audience than he is with us, and it's very cool.
I sat there, and I was probably like
Dropping
22,
the
and I was
alfalfa.
like, this is probably not normal. But I didn't have any context for this at the time. I was just like, what the heck? And then like I kind of went down this rabbit hole. I come from a psychology background. I understand the brain. I started digging into this, and I was basically like, oh, I've just been like fucking like just doing lines 6 times a night for like 10 years. Just
Okay.
and like I have just like, and like my brain is not like, I have like the brain of like a junkie. It's just like, I need to fix. And I realized I was like
That's
kind of like an,
effect. I mean, that's
it is literally a neurological effect. It is the same effect you get when you do cocaine, when you do heroin, when you do anything. Like the brain, it's this like dopamine kind of cycle, right? You do things in anticipation of reward. You get more of the reward, and you need more and more and more stimulus to get the same reward,
your
right?
point here, because I think there's a lot of people in the audience that are like, yeah, sure, I get that.
we've all taken it too far, and as a result, you were left with.
But like I went online looking and I saw like a lot. Like this is where I saw these people who were like fucking 14, and they're like, I literally can't get a boner. And I was like, holy shit. And I was like, it's like an actual thing. Like a lot of these people
14-year-olds
come out of the woodwork
because they've been doing a bunch of lines of cocaine.
Yeah, totally. No.
No,
The
because they've
cocaine
been-
is analogous to fucking jerking off and porn all the time.
My
like
mistake.
porn is
You took the
it's
cocaine a little
unnatural
too
in the
far.
same
It's
way
okay.
that like our brains were designed to love sugar, and when we saw sugar in the wire, we were like, ooh, binge the sugar. In the real world, like we weren't designed to take this in. It's like so overwhelming to our natural sensory like operative state, right? Like we can't deal with like the infinite like fucking crazy shit
Yes.
versus like one woman, right? Like in back in the day, right? You'd like make fun of like the kids who used to get like the lingerie like issue of like the freaking Sears catalog, and they're like, oh my god, this girl's got a bra on. And now kids today
So-
are like watching like weird stuff. They're like their brains are warped. They're formed differently.
I think this is just like everything we discuss, a very dangerous issue that if we allow the government to intervene in any way whatsoever, and there is a line, right? A certain level of regulation and involvement by a bigger entity beyond the individual is important sometimes. When there really, truly is a crisis, well, Big Daddy's got to get involved. Like, that's just how it goes. But one thing that I personally believe is that, to me, porn is one of those industries that needs to be completely open, completely, obviously, like legal. But I look at it the way I look at prostitution, for example. I wish that prostitution was not only legal, but regulated in the sense that the workers were taken care of, that they were not put into situations where they were harmed by the customers. I mean, so many times you can look at countries and societies where this is the case. Some fucking crazy dude walks in and beats the shit out of a woman. These things could be prevented. The fact that they could be tested, the fact that they could be taken care of from an insurance and government perspective to make sure that they have their individual needs and wants met. I think you could look at porn the same way.
No, you can't. It's not a one-to-one individual transaction. It's a digital thing that's infinitely scalable. It has all these.
Why is that an important factor?
Because, for example, when you go and interact with a
Or you
prostitute,
don't even have to worry about any of that.
you can look at said prostitute and be like, you are not a 12-year-old girl who was kidnapped and sold into slave. But I don't mean to get too dark here, but like Pornhub, for example, came under serious fire in recent years because people were literally kidnapping girls.
That's
Girls
a
were like,
sub-issue. That's a sub-issue.
no, this stuff, this is what I'm talking about with the externality. When you have this free platform where like, oh, I can do anything I want in the privacy
That
of
was
my
already
room.
protected by law. That's not okay in the first place.
It's not okay in the first place. Okay.
That has nothing to do with porn.
Who's stopping it?
I think Armand
Who's stopping it?
right here. It's
Who's
actually
stopping it? There is a literal
You have an
epidemic
underage
of
girl
this.
performing sexual acts and videos being put online. That's already illegal.
in what country is
There's an
That's nothing
epidemic
to
of
do
it.
with
Who's
porn.
holding them accountable?
Who's holding that a person? That's a whole division of law that is like dedicated to making sure that never happens.
They move. This is a similar argument to the drug argument,
their own
right?
laws, and I think that's actually fine. Like they'll get smacked in their own countries, like because the internet allows you to like upload things doesn't mean that makes it that doesn't make it legal. Then you get the legal repercussions afterwards. Like that's fair. I think that's actually fine.
It has to, because porn has to be looked at as what it really is. I mean, if you're taking like a piece of something that is inherently illegal in the first place, and then like plugging that into the conversation of porn. Like that was never legal in the first place. That was never okay in the first place.
There's an argument.
I'm
to be-
still with you for
we
the most
apply
part here.
this elsewhere in life, right? Where the consumption of the product that promote, even though you consuming the product is your right to do it, right? But your consuming of the product produces these horrible externalities in the production of the product, right?
Yes.
We as a society sometimes step in and go like, okay, we need to put like at least like a check in place here, right?
Yeah.
Like Pornhub at one point had 80 moderators. 80. Monitoring 12,500 gigabytes per minute of transfers. Like, and you're like, well, they're regulated in their country, but they moved to some like freaking they moved to like St. Bart's or some random jurisdiction, right? Like that's not like a good. There has to be something else besides that, right? We're like, oh, they'll be regulated in the Sudan. Like, is that really a good argument?
Eric, should we plug Lobster Tube?
What is Lobster Tube?
Give
I don't
us
want
all
to
your
see Lobster Tube.
Give us all your alt layer ones.
Have we gone off the rails? I've had a lot of wine.
I think the real reason Nick didn't want to share is he's got all these alt layer ones that is just like too good for the mainstream.
I wish I did. I wish I had something spicy.
Keeping him to himself.
I wish I had something spicy.
I'll tell you one story. Maybe we'll close it out. I think this is probably where it's at. We were on a trip. We were on a trip one time, and I don't know why or how porn came up. Probably because bunch of guys, you know how that goes, just talking about random shit, and then all of a sudden, one of our good friends, Jason, brings up like the 17th most popular porn. Like he had at one point done like proper due diligence and gone down the rabbit hole and been like, okay, what are like the top porn sites? And down there at number like 17 was Lobster Tube. And we just died laughing. So apparently there's like an aggregator out there called Lobster Tube. So like we probably just did a disservice to someone who actually has a problem and just gave them like the holy mecca, like the holy grail of like,
don't give
of like
them
porn.
the names of the dealers.
Anyway, I think that what we ultimately have is something that like most things in life should remain open and free, but only regulated to the point that it truly affects either.
Do you think 9-year-olds should be able to just like have access to this like everywhere?
They have access to high
did
fructose
too.
corn syrup and like
High
Capri
fructose
Sun,
corn
like
syrup
which
is
also
not the same as this.
Oh,
This is
man.
like literally the worst crack for like a 9-year-old.
Do you
brain.
believe
guys
that a
all lost
9-year-old
me.
should have access to the internet, Steven?
Yes, but with some restrictions and like
Me
strict
too.
monitoring. Like these
Yeah, me
kids like
too.
can't like they can't run them. Like we're already seeing evidence of them like their freaking brains are warped already from all the stupid shit on TikTok. Like what do you think is happening with this? Like it's insane to me that people don't think there need to be like
Of the
at
internet.
least some guardrails, right? Like that. I'm crazy. I'm like blown away that people are like so lackadaisical about this.
Then on the Chrome browser to moderate the internet, or like who's on the moderate? Like who becomes the moderator? The mom, the dad, the Chrome? Like who becomes?
Well, parents should moderate, right? But like I think as a society, we have to at least ask the question. Like we've obviously gotten together and be like, hey, we shouldn't have 11-year-olds smoking cigarettes. We shouldn't just give them cigarettes. We shouldn't just give them booze. It's not good for them. Like in my mind, this is like way worse for an 11-year-old. Like way worse. Like I think this is like messes them up in a way that's like potentially like very devastating.
I don't know.
We're seeing
like,
the
there's
impact
so many
in
ways
society.
to look at this. It also could make your sex better by the time you're
No,
15
I think
and
that's
16.
I think it's fucking bullshit. I hate that argument. Oh, what's important?
Oh,
Sex
he's
gets better.
triggered. I got him.
Can I make you guys all laugh? Because
You're just like
Yes,
you're just like
please.
you're with your girlfriend. You're like, so you want to?
Mina and I were-
You want to bring like a black bear into the bedroom? Like, would that be fun?
okay, so Mina and I were listening to an NPR episode about gun control on the way out to Jackson Hole, and this woman goes like, it doesn't matter if it's a man or woman, but like this person goes like, did you know that the shooter was a white supremacist, and then they got their ideologies from the internet? And did you know that they got their ideologies from meme culture on the internet? And I was like, in my mind, I'm just thinking like, okay, so you got to ban the internet. You got to ban the internet. You got to ban memes. You got to ban communication in general. Like you got to ban it. Like there's not a single thing left that can exist. You got to ban porn. You got to ban fucking friendships. You got to
I'm not
ban
saying to ban porn. I'm asking you to acknowledge that it is an
Dude.
unbelievably addictive thing that society is not really grasping with how addictive and destructive it is. And we have to take a look at like how dangerous it is, especially for young kids who see this shit because they have phones, they're online, they don't have context, their brains are very neuroplastic, and it's manifesting in society now. Like there's a reason there's a reason why people's relationships are fucked. There's a reasons why people are virgins. There's a reason why people prefer like this to like having real relationships with women. It's like a, you know.
I think this is gonna start like a hashtag let me wink campaign.
Let me wink.
If you're with Steven,
if
you can come up with your own slogan.
If you're a consenting 30-year-old adult, wink away. Like,
Let me wink, Steven.
That's not my point. I just think people are too like sort of laissez-faire about this. I don't think there's enough like gravitas about like how serious.
I think we're
this
too
is, you know?
tipsy to like tolerate the level of nuance that Steven is bringing.
Are we cutting this
I will
off
give
now?
you that.
Did I
We're
go
cutting
over the
this
edge?
off.
All right.
You're bringing some great nuance. It's very important content.
Sterile, and I like the taste.
It's fine. We'll just cut this whole section. Just cut it all.
The reality is,
I regret everything.
The reality
I regret
is,
everything.
there's some very good takes in there, but
Going home.
it's a little too sterile, as Eric said. I think that's a wrap. Thank you guys for being here. This was a wonderful episode. It was probably our longest one ever, probably because there was a little too much mezcal and wine. But we appreciate you being here. Hope you enjoyed these topics. If you want more of these topics, if you want different topics, let us know what to discuss. Hop in the Discord, alfalfapod.com. And if there were any interesting takes, quotes, anything like that in here, throw them in a review in Apple Podcasts, and we'll read them out in the next episode. We love you guys. Peace.
Later, guys.
Later.